May 12, 1945, Kreuzberg District, Berlin. 15-year-old Klaus Becker crouched behind a pile of rubble, the Panzerfaust anti-tank weapon heavy and awkward across his thin shoulders. His hands shook from fear, from exhaustion from 3 days without real food. The uniform they'd given him 2 weeks ago hung loose on his frame. The Volkssturm armband felt like a noose around his bicep. Through the dust and smoke he heard them coming, the grinding treads of American tanks, the shouts in English, the systematic. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel, like it, spread the word, and tell us where you're watching from. Vance that had swept through the city block by house, making his unit. If you could call 12 terrified boys and 3 old men a unit fall back until there was nowhere left to retreat, his Hitler youth training echoed. In his head, the Americans are barbarians who will kill prisoners. Better to die fighting for the Führer than surrender to beasts who show no mercy. His squadron leader, an SS officer who disappeared yesterday, had been explicit. They will torture. You then execute, you fight to the death or use your last bullet on yourself. Klaus had believed it completely. Why wouldn't he? It was all he'd been told for years. Americans were subhuman monsters. Surrender meant torture and death. His only choices were victory or death. The tank rumbled closer. Klaus lifted the Panzerfaust, trying to remember the abbreviated training point. I'm fire, his 14-year-old friend. Friedrich had tried using one yesterday. The backblast had knocked him unconscious. He'd been shot while lying stunned in the street, killed by tank machine gun fire, before he could even get up. Klaus's finger found the trigger. The tank was maybe 30 meters away now, close enough he could hit it. Maybe, probably not. But if he didn't fight, he was a coward. He was betraying the Führer. Betraying Germany, betraying everything. The tank stopped. The turret traversed, aiming at his position. Klaus closed his eyes, waiting for the main gun to fire and end him instead. Voice loud speaking, terrible German, come out, boy. Weapons down. Klaus froze. They were calling him boy, not enemy, not target, boy. The voice came again, firmer but not cruel. We won't shoot. Come out. Klaus stayed frozen. This was a trick, had to be. They'd shoot him. The moment he showed himself, the propaganda had been clear. Americans killed prisoners, but the propaganda had also said the Wehrmacht would never retreat, that Germany was winning, that the Führer had secret weapons that would turn the war. Klaus had watched the Wehrmacht collapse. He'd seen Berlin burned. The secret weapons had never appeared. What if the propaganda about Americans was also lies? He set down the Panzerfaust with trembling hands, stood slowly raising his arms above his. Yet his voice cracked when he shouted back. Don't shoot. 3 American soldiers appeared from behind the tank, rifles raised but not firing. They were huge. Klaus had been told Americans were weaklings, but these men looked like giants in their combat gear. One was black. The propaganda had said black American soldiers were especially savage. Klaus closed his eyes again, waiting for bullets. Someone grabbed his shoulder. Klaus flinched, expecting a knife or club instead. The hand steadied him, almost gentle when he opened his eyes. One of the Americans, the black soldier he'd been taught to fear most, was handing him a canteen. Trinken, the American said in broken German. Drink. That they tortured Germans for entertainment. When American soldiers surrounded our position and called for surrender, I tried to kill myself. I put my rifle barrel in my mouth. An American knocked it away before I could fire. I was crying, begging him to just shoot me quickly. He looked horrified. He kept saying something I didn't understand later. I learned it was Jesus Christ, he's just a kid. But at the time I thought he was getting ready to torture. Method conditioning made child soldiers extremely dangerous in combat. They would fight with suicidal determination, knowing or believing that capture meant fates worse than death. American forces advancing through Germany encountered pockets of fanatical resistance from teenagers who'd been psychologically primed to prefer death over surrender. The first encounters, American forces advancing into Germany in early 1945, were unprepared for the systematic use of child soldiers. Combat veterans who'd fought across Europe suddenly found themselves facing opponents who were obviously underage boys with adolescent faces, thin from malnutrition, wearing uniforms several sizes too large. The cognitive dissonance was immediate and disturbing. These were children, some young enough to be the American sons or little brothers, but they were firing weapons and needed to be neutralized. The rules of engagement were clear. Armed enemies were legitimate targets regardless of age, but the emotional reality was complicated. American soldiers who'd spent months fighting, Wehrmacht professionals, found themselves deeply uncomfortable shooting teenagers. Some hesitated fatally. German child soldiers killed or wounded American troops who couldn't bring themselves to fire on children. Others overcame hesitation and shot, then dealt with psychological consequences. Afterwards, Sergeant Robert Mitchell, 3rd Infantry Division, described his first encounter with Volkssturm child soldiers near Nuremberg. We were clearing a village when fire came from a building. We returned fire, then stormed the position. Inside were 5 kids, maybe 14 or 15 years old. 2 were dead from our fire. 3 surrendered. They were terrified, crying, expecting us to execute them. The guy next to me started crying. He had a son about that age back home. We just killed children because they were shooting at us. There was no good answer to that situation. The encounters created impossible moral dilemmas. German children indoctrinated and armed posed genuine threats, but killing children, even armed hostile children, violated fundamental human instincts and civilized warfare norms. American soldiers found themselves caught between military necessity and moral revulsion. The solution most units adopted was aggressive attempts to capture rather than kill. When encountering obvious child soldiers, American forces would call for surrender, and German used loudspeakers to encourage capitulation and hold fire when possible to give children opportunities to quit fighting. This wasn't official policy. It was individual soldiers and small unit leaders making moral choices in real time. The mercy decision, the systematic sparing of German child soldiers, represented collective American decision-making. At every level, individual soldiers, unit commanders, division leadership, occupation authorities at the tactical level. Soldiers who encountered child soldiers often chose to risk their own lives. Volkssturm casualties had been so high. When Klaus explained he'd been captured and held by Americans, she was shocked he'd survived. When he described his treatment, the food, the medical care, the relative kindness, she cried. All the propaganda had told us Americans would kill prisoners. She said, "I'd grieved for you, certain you were dead or worse. Now you come home healthy, fed, treated well by the people who were supposed to be monsters." Everything they told us was lies. This pattern repeated across Germany. Families expecting their children to have been killed or brutalized instead received them back alive, often healthier than when conscripted. The contrast between propaganda and reality created foundation for post-war German attitudes toward America. The psychological impact on the former child soldiers was profound and lasting. Many became advocates for democracy, peace, and German-American friendship. They'd experienced firsthand the difference between Nazi-lees and American reality. This created generational effects. Their children and grandchildren heard stories about Americans sparing their fathers and grandfathers' lives, treating them humanely, sending them home instead of exacting revenge. Peter Hoffman, whose leg had been saved by American doctors, later wrote, "I owe my life to Americans, who had every reason to let me die. I'd shot at them. I'd tried to kill them. They saved me anyway. That mercy taught me more about morality and civilization than any ideology. I spent my life after the war working for peace and democracy because Americans showed me what civilized people do. They spare their enemies when they can." Child soldier encounters. March-May 1945 estimated child soldiers in combat against American forces 60,000 killed in action, approximately 15,000, 20,000 wounded, approximately 12,000, 15,000 captured, approximately 18,000, 25,000 captured child soldiers repatriated alive, approximately 95%. The survival rate among captured child soldiers was notably higher than among adult German POWs, reflecting both American prioritization of children's welfare and lower rates of disease and complications among younger prisoners. Medical care statistics: child soldiers receiving medical treatment in American Facilities approximately 4,200 surgical procedures, 892 amputations often necessary due to combat trauma. 34 prosthetics provided, 89 post-war medical follow-up arranged, approximately 800 cases post-war repatriation child soldiers processed through POW camps, approximately 20,000 average time in custody, 6 to 9 months provided education vocational training, while imprisoned approximately 8,000 released to families or social services. 95% estimated deaths in American custody, all causes less than 500. These numbers documented that American forces facing child soldiers in combat killed when necessary, but captured when possible, treated wounded without regard to age,